September 13th, 1984. This is Joe Todd, and interview with William Dwight Leonard. Sir, where were you born?
Born out here on a claim about 3 miles southwest of town.
And when's your birthday?
January 20, 1907.
1907.
Okay, you?
Okay. Who is your father?
William Barr Leonard. B-A-R-R.
And where was he from?
He was from southeastern Iowa.
And who is your mother?
Mary Elizabeth Rich. She was from Wisner, Nebraska.
How come your folks came to Oklahoma Territory?
My dad was a minister, a Presbyterian minister. And his first church was in Nebraska, where he met my mother, who was a school teacher. They were married there at Ord, Nebraska. And the next church was in another town in Nebraska. And he had a chance to come to Chickasha. That was way before statehood. And he liked a little adventure, and so they were in Chickasha for about 6 years, up until 1904 or 5. The Presbyterian Church had some little outlying churches here in northwest Oklahoma in the Panhandle, and wanted somebody to sort of be an itinerant preacher. And he took the job, and he came with a horse and buggy up here to Beaver. And they suggested to him if he would stay here and prove up a claim, he could, they would pay him enough to live on. So they found a relinquishment of a claim out here southwest of town, about 3 miles. And he and my mother lived there until the 6 years was up, and he was pastor of the little church here.
What did he do to prove up on the claim?
Sir?
What did he do to prove up on the claim?
Well, you file papers and stay there 6 years, you know. Took 6 years to prove up a claim.
Okay, you have to do any improvements on it, any buildings?
I don't know for sure. There was a 2-room house on the place. I think he added to it.
Yeah.
He did plant 1,000 black locust trees.
When is the church here established, the Presbyterian Church?
My understanding is 1887.
And he arrived here in 1904?
1905, let's see, I suppose about 1905.
Yeah, okay. And you were born January 1907?
Yes.
Okay. After he proved up on the claim, the 6 years was up. Did he?
Moved to Coldwater, Kansas, where he took the church.
Okay. And
he'd been up there 5 or 6 years, and his health wasn't too good, and he wanted to quit preaching, and he came back to Beaver. While he was here, he had a $2,000 20-pay life insurance policy come due, and he took that money about 1912 and bought 2 other quarters of land. So he had 3 quarters of land here, and about 1916 he came back here and farmed, and you know, conducted services around over the county as they'd call on him, and buried people and married people and one thing and another.
as a small boy, what were your chores on the farm?
Oh, well, you know, clean the chicken house and help in harvest and milk cows. I was really raised a farmer's son. And World War I, labor was scarce, and when I was in the 8th grade, I believe it was, another boy and I made a hand in a header barge, you know, in a wheat harvest. you'd bring in the kindling and the coal and all those sort of things.
Do you remember World War One?
Oh yeah.
Was there any organized efforts for the war effort in the school?
I don't remember too much in the school. I was in the 4th and 5th grades about that time. The Red Cross had a sewing room up here, you know, that they sewed for the soldier boys. I remember they knit socks and all those kind of things. I don't remember too much special activity in the school.
What about Armistice Day?
Well, that was a big celebration. People came to town, and soon afterwards we had I remember a fellow here, Joe Meese, whose father was a county judge. They had him at the theater, and he was one of the first ones to come back, and he had served in the trenches, and he told them how it was. But a lot of people came to town. No radio, of course.
When did you start school?
Where?
Yeah.
I started at Coldwater, Kansas. Went through the 3rd grade at Coldwater.
And then what school did you attend in Beaver?
Well, the grade school and high school.
Mm-hmm. What year did you graduate from high school?
1925.
1925. Tell me about the flu epidemic of 1918.
Well, yeah, I remember it. My mother was teaching school that year in Beaver, and we had rented a little house in town here, and a lot of people had the flu. I didn't have it very bad. My dad had it pretty bad. A lot of people had the flu, and it was real serious.
Mm-hmm. How many people died of that flu in this area?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
Okay. How about the Depression, 1930s? How did that affect you and your family?
Well, I didn't marry till in 1936, but I'd graduated from college, and 4-year college, and I was in a hardware store. Thought I'd make enough money in a hardware. We bought a hardware store, another fellow and I. Thought I'd make enough money in 1929. That's when we bought it, you know, to go on to law school. Excuse me. But anyway, I was here all through the Depression. Mm-hmm. I saw the dirt storms, you know, and I went to law school for a half a year in 32, I guess it was, and ran out of money and came home, and I worked for a lawyer who was over the First National Bank building. And one year there was 100 days we couldn't see across the street. Things got down pretty. We didn't any of us go hungry. Lots of grasshoppers. They'd ship in carloads of sawdust, take them up here to the pavilion, which had a big cement floor, and mix it up with some bran poison and molasses. But one year, I don't remember which year, it could have been 35. These black locust trees we had had all done well, and the hoppers were so thick that they took all the leaves off. We poisoned them and they fell down, and actually a smell, you know, a bad odor from all those dead grasshoppers. But we had the worst years here were the first year, 1933, I had 600 acres of summer fallowed wheat, which all looked good until February they started blowing. And we lost all of it. But the worst years were 33. We raised some wheat in 34. 35 was a terrible year, and we raised wheat in 36, some. In 37, the worst years were 33, 35, and 37.
Did many people go to California from this area?
Quite a few.
Did you ever consider going?
No.
What does a dust storm look like? Describe one.
Well, you know, they have these pictures of one we had in April of 35, when it rolled in, you know, and was held close to the earth by some kind of atmospheric conditions. And a lot of times they'll say this is a typical dirt storm. Well, that's the only one we ever had like that. It rolled in, just kind of rolled. I saw it coming. I was out in the yard out here. And when it hit, it was absolutely dark. You couldn't see your hand in front of your face. But that's the only one we ever had like that. Most of them were accompanied by a wind that seemed to sweep on the ground, you know, and it'd move little pebbles and dirt. And if you were facing one of those with a car, you'd ruin your windshield. Just hard wind and dirt in the air, you know, and it'd get real bad by afternoon.
Yeah. What about floods and storms, tornadoes up here?
Oh, we've had a few tornadoes, but nothing real destructive.
Nothing like Woodward.
No, nothing like Woodward.
What about floods?
Well, we have some big rains, and a river. I've seen the river up, of course, up in float telephone poles up in the south end of Beaver. But 1923, I remember, we had a lot of rain and hail in the spring and a lot of rain in the fall. We had a flood in the spring and a drought all summer and a flood in the fall.
Yeah.
I remember my dad, you know, mentioning that. But we weren't bothered too much with floods. Take the creek fences out, you know, and all that sort of thing. A lot of erosion. A lot of erosion on these fields.
What about did the CCC do any work up here to stop erosion?
I don't think they did in Beaver County. I don't remember of anything in Beaver County.
What about WPA?
They did quite a little work. Yeah. You know, the building downtown, the Legion building it is now, was built with bricks that were taken up from, they had bricked paving down here, paved with brick, and it was on a red keel base, which didn't prove very good. And they took up the middle part of it and built this building out of it. I think it was WPA. And also they cut some limestone out here, and where the sheriff's office is now is limestone and quarried out here in Beaver County, and they sawed some of it by hand and built this building.
Tell me any stories you've heard your father say about the old church. What Miss Jackson was talking about.
Yeah, well, I don't know. We've got some of the old records, some of the Sunday school records, you know, that show what the offering was. It would be in pennies usually, you know, 15 cents or what have you. It was the only church here for several years. They did have a fire. It had a stove there and had a fire and burnt the floor, and it's been redone 2 or 3 times. The church has got a basement under it. My mother was a superintendent for a good many years at the church.
How long was your father at that church?
Well, the first time, just 6 years. He died in 1924.
You say you went to college 4 years?
Sir?
You went to college 4 years?
Yeah.
Where'd you go?
College of Emporia at Emporia, Kansas.
What'd you study?
Well, I majored in English and history. And then I later went to law school in Tennessee.
And then you came back here?
Mm-hmm.
What'd you do when you came back?
Well, this was a one-year school. Didn't think I could afford to go 3 years, and I worked in this law office, Louisboro law office, for 2 years.
Wade Leafboro?
Sir?
Wade Leafboro?
No, it was a brother of his, Bob Leafboro. And the Leafboros originated in Beaver County.
Mm-hmm.
And I took the bar. I couldn't take the bar till I had 3 years, including working laws. But I farmed off and on most of the time.
How has farming methods changed over the years?
How's what?
What are some of the major changes in farming methods that you've seen?
Oh, it's been pretty radical. We used to list. Out here, my dad bought a Ford tractor in 1918, and we'd pull a 2-row lister. Then we'd do what you call bust ridges with horses. And we would drill the little 8-foot band front drills. But, it's been a major change. No comparison.
World War II. What'd you do?
I was in the state senate during World War II.
Mm-hmm. When were you first elected?
1941.
1941. From this area?
Yeah.
Tell me about your time in the Senate.
I was there during I was elected the same time Bob Kerr was elected governor, and I was there in the Kerr and Roy Turner administration.
What kind of governor was Kerr?
He was a good governor, very outstanding. They were both good governors.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure that two of Oklahoma's better governors.
Did you know Bill Murray?
Yeah, I knew Bill. He used to come up and sit around the Senate a lot during Kerr administration.
Mm-hmm.
Come in on the floor, and he was quite a person. Had some of his books with him. He tried to sell his books. But he was old at that time.
Mm-hmm. What were some of the activities going on that Oklahoma supported for the war effort in World War II? Like bond drives or?
Well, they had all those bond drives, of course. Well, of course, they had rationing for tires and gasoline and what have you. And there was all kinds of boards set up, to run the thing.
Well, let me see. What kind of man was your father? What was he like?
It's pretty hard to describe your dad.
That's true.
He was a very considerate sort of a person, and very easy to get along with.
Mm-hmm.
He had very definite opinions. He is a descendant The Leonards first came to the United States back in 1600 somewhere, and two Leonards, a James and a Henry Leonard, settled at a place in Massachusetts called Taunton, Massachusetts, and had one of the first iron foundries, or bloomeries they call them. And we're descendants of one of those Leonards way back.
Mm-hmm. Did any of your great-grandfathers fight in the Civil War, or grandfathers?
My father's father and his grandfather, in other words, my grandfather and my great-grandfather, were both in the Civil War.
Which side?
They were on the Union side.
Union. Where were they from?
Well, my grandfather was from Kossuth, Iowa, which is just north of Davenport a little ways.
Mm-hmm.
And they had come down there from Ohio, around Columbus, Ohio. And then later my grandfather, they moved to Fairfield to send their children to school. My dad graduated from Fairfield College at Fairfield, Iowa. And then later from McCormick Seminary in Chicago. But his folks later moved to Tacoma, Washington.
Hmm. You have any stories about the Civil War, what they did?
Not really. I didn't see my grandfather. They were way out there and we were here, and my mother and I went out there after my dad passed away, and my grandfather was still living, but he was 86.
Yeah.
He just didn't, it's just one of the things he didn't talk about much.
Mm-hmm.
So I really don't know.
Well, what else you want to talk about?
Sir?
What else would you like to talk about?
Oh, I don't know. My mother was rich, R-I-C-H.
Mm-hmm.
And her people came over way back there from England. Theoretically, her family goes back, and there's a connection with Winston Churchill.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Winston Churchill's mother was
Right, she was American.
from this country. I'd read you what an uncle gave me, if you want to hear it.
Yeah, sure.
Doesn't have much to do with this country, but I wrote this down one time for whatever it's worth. I got it in this old notebook. We were up there in Nebraska. According to Uncle George, my great-great-grandfather's sister, Abigail Rich, married a Mr. Jerome in Connecticut. Their son became a millionaire in New York City. The son's daughter, Jenny Jerome, married Randolph Churchill, son of Lord Churchill, Duke of Marlborough. Randolph Churchill and his wife, Jenny Jerome, were Winston Churchill's father and mother. I asked him what relation that made me, and he said I would be third cousin once removed, which I never figured out.
Yeah.
Nicholas Rich came over from England in 1680. Part of house and barn he built are still standing at Sudbury, Massachusetts. Elisha Rich fought in the French and Indian War. Now, you're not interested in this kind of stuff. But, a lot of families, they lose track when they come out west here.
That's right.
And these people kind of looked into things. We had a relative that lived back in Boston, Massachusetts, and she was kind of brought them up to date on people in the East.
What kind of games do you play as a child?
We lived out in the country, 3.5 miles, which you don't run back and forth to town then like you did now. And I never did take part in school athletics. I was kind of skinny and probably a good thing I didn't play football, but I wouldn't have been able to practice, you know. I'd kick a football out there and on Sunday and Saturday, and had a basketball goal and just play by myself mostly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We played tennis. I did play tennis at school a lot. During the noon hour, you know, we'd play tennis.
Tennis.
I took part in track.
Yeah.
You're not learning much from me, I'm afraid, you know.
Yeah.
It's life then pretty much like it is now, you know. You have your little
Well,
pleasures.
we get a little bit from every person,
Yeah.
and it all fits in. We get a good story.
Mhm.
Like when you talked about that dust storm, I didn't know about that. You know, that people say that's the typical dust storm, but the only one you had.
Yeah.
I didn't know about that.
That's the only one we had like that. It just rolled in. I saw it coming. It was on a Sunday, and a lot of people were out picnicking one thing or another because it was a nice day otherwise. And the wind really never did blow real hard during that storm. It was an atmospheric thing. Only time it happened.
How long did that storm last?
Well, it came on in the afternoon, and I suppose 2 or 3 hours. Then you could begin to, maybe an hour or two, and you could begin to see some, and
Yeah.
you know, went on down. It covered a lot of territory.
Well, I think we have a good interview.
My mother she was trying to make a little money. She and another one bought a store down in Pampa, Texas, ladies' ready-to-wear, and she was down there. And it hit down there, you know, about an hour after it did here or something. I don't remember just when.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Yes, sir.